Welcome. I'm Sarah Kyle, Director of Community and Partner Engagement at Michigan 211, and this is From Hello to Help, a podcast series that aims to engage in meaningful conversations about health, human services, and resources essential to the daily lives of Michiganders. Today, we're talking about something that's timely, urgent, and frankly, life-saving: summer relief and disaster preparedness. We all know the drill. Summer comes in fast and hard. Temperatures climb, storms hit without much warning, and some of our neighbors are left vulnerable, especially seniors, children, and families without access to stable housing or transportation. And add to that the increasing impacts of climate change, and we're looking at more frequent extreme weather events across our state: flooding, wildfires, power outages, and prolonged heat waves. So, what do we need to know? What resources are actually available when a crisis hits? And how do we help each other before, during, and after the storm? Joining me today are two experts in this. We have Ferguson, a climate and environmental expert working with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and Chad Veeser. He's the Emergency Management Officer at Michigan 211, but we affectionately call him the Disaster Dude. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Can we start big picture? What are the most common weather-related emergencies we're seeing in Michigan during the summer months?
Yeah, from the MDHHS perspective, the things that we track the most at this time of the year are extreme heat events, which makes sense. I mean, it's summertime, things are getting warmer, but with climate change, we are seeing higher temperatures more often across the state. We've also seen in the last few years wildfire smoke come down from Canadian wildfires. So since 2023, that's been a newer issue during the summer, is for us to be tracking those air quality issues related to the Canadian wildfire smoke. And then we also have strong storms that knock out power, that cause flooding in some communities. And so we're also tracking those types of events, especially as it relates to power outages with like carbon monoxide poisoning and issues that surround those those types of events.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Chad, would you mind telling me, if someone is listening right now, what should they know today that could protect them or someone they love this summer?
I mean, there's a lot of basics, right? And I think Aaron hit on one of the central parts to this is we rely on power a lot for cooling and for our daily lives. So understanding where you stand in your household if power goes out. So do you have food resources? If there's spoilage that will happen, do you have ability for sheltering, especially for vulnerable populations? You said at the top, small children, elderly. So making sure that you it's knowledge, really. That's why 211 does this, because if you don't have the knowledge, you call 211. I'm sure we'll say it again. You can text 898-211. You can contact your local health departments. There are a host of resources, and your emergency management offices have their own social media, in their counties and whatnot. So I'd say right now, we could go through the checklist of all the things you need to get done, but making sure you stay cool in times of heat, and then knowing where to find answers, I think, is the most important, because those things change, right? In a disaster, depending on the type of event, that there's no one magic, spell that solves all the problems.
No, but there is a place you can call to get most of those answers, or to at least get you closer. And we know that as 211. Thank you, Chad. Aaron, what are the biggest gaps in community awareness around preparedness when it comes to summer emergencies? What do you see as something that, man, you wish all Michiganders understood?
Yeah, I think one thing that we see is people tend to think that heat or air quality issues don't apply to them, that
Mhm.
they're not in the group of folks that could be impacted by it. And what we know is that as temperatures reach a certain level, or heat and humidity reach a certain level, even healthy people can be impacted. If it's over 90 or 95, everyone's body loses its ability to keep itself cool, and you need to find air conditioning and find other ways to cool yourself. And the same with air quality issues. When the air quality is unhealthy because of wildfire smoke, that affects everybody. Certainly, though, children, pregnant people, the elderly. If you have heart or lung conditions, like those folks are more sensitive. But when the air is unhealthy, that fine particulate matter can get into everybody's lungs and cause issues for everybody, not just those most at risk. So I think it's just having people be aware that these can be serious situations, and to um, you don't have to completely shut things down, but just make plans to protect yourself and your family and your neighbors during those events.
Thank you. Can you gentlemen walk us through if we were to go specifically into a disaster like a heat wave, a flood, or a severe storm? What does response look like? How do people access help in real time?
I mean, I can start. It starts with alerting, obviously, through news or social media or wherever you're getting your information. Depending on the event, if it's an actual storm, and then there's a lot of coordination with emergency management, with at your local level, the state level, and there's a whole process. If it's a big enough event, FEMA sometimes becomes involved. They put some eyes and ears in the ground first, and then they come in a little bit later. But in the immediate event, you're talking about a lot of information. It's very confusing. I would say that too. This is my plug where people are probably the most vulnerable in times of disaster, and there are a lot of bad actors out there that like to take advantage of the confusion. So knowing, I'm gonna beat this drum. Knowing where you get good information is critical. Going to your local health departments, their websites, going to your local emergency managers' websites, and of course, calling, texting, visiting 211. Those kinds of resources are critical. So it starts there. It starts with the alerting. It starts with the initial mobilization, and there's a lot of steps that go through it. I'm sure Aaron can add more to that. But that's a tornado strong storm event. There is, we're talking air quality, wildfire smoke and ozone. There are other types of health alerts that go out as well. So
Thanks, Jed. Aaron, would you add anything?
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. We often recommend sort of a similar set of guidance depending on the event. It's know the conditions that ahead of time, like Chad said, know where you're going to get your information from. If it's with air quality issues, there's the EPA Air Now app is great to understand what the air quality is like in your area. The National Weather Service has something called the heat risk tool, which can show you what the heat risk is going to be like in your area, and steps to take. And so we try to tell people, just make that part of your daily routine first off. Like that preparedness will save you a lot of issues if and when an event does come. So you know what the conditions are, you know how you're going to respond to it if the air is unhealthy or if it's hot, or if you live in an area where it's prone to flood. Like, if you get a heavy storm and your streets start flooding and you see
Mhm.
that that's going to happen, it's time to enact your family's plan for what to do in those situations. And then as the event is unfolding, making sure that you're trying to limit your exposure, to those risk points, staying aware of how the conditions might be changing. If you need to find somewhere to go, we often point to 211 as a great resource that people should call and visit to, find out where is your local shelter, cooling center, um, and if you can't stay in your home, go find those places.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. You had mentioned a little bit of this, but can you talk more about any local or state alert systems that residents can sign up for to get real time weather and emergency updates?
Yeah, there's a system called EnviroFlash, and you sign up with your email, and you put in your location where you live,
Mhm.
and it will push out alerts to your phone or through your email, um, on air quality, on other issues, alerts that are coming out. Um, that's probably the best way for a lot of those. I think a lot of people have weather apps and different things now, and the National Weather Service watches and warnings and advisories often are linked in those weather apps. So, that's another good place for storm or heat related information, is making sure that you're getting those official alerts through that app to your
Mhm.
phone, so you can see exactly what is expected.
Perfect. Chad, would you add anything to that list?
no, no, that's great. I was going to add something earlier, and I think this is Aaron mentioned about if you need to go to a shelter. This is kind of like insurance sales at this point. This won't work after the fact, but have a go bag. Every opportunity I have to say that, you don't want to scramble in the middle of like, especially if it's a really immediate threat. There's quicker things than others, but you don't want to be, if you're stressed, you don't want to be looking for your medication, for clothing, and if you have a small child, like formula, whatever that may be, make sure you have that ready beforehand. I cannot stress that enough. Make sure you have that. So that's not a fancy technical website or any other solution. That is just common sense. So I'm going to go a little bit grassroots and say, make sure you also have a go bag. I'm just injecting that kind of tip into that, because it doesn't work very well when you're stressed. It doesn't. You will forget something.
Well, and Aaron had mentioned a plan, right? Having a plan, something that you talk to your family about, is pretty important as well. So thank you. No, beat that drum. We need to make sure folks are ready because, as we had mentioned, things are sometimes very quick. We've seen that in the news recently, obviously. Chad, talk to us a little bit about how agencies are working together across government, nonprofits, health departments to reach residents before they're in crisis, right? You had just talked about what do we need to do before. What else are other agencies doing in our state?
I mean, it's kind of what we're doing here, right? I mean, it's working with 211, working with the health departments, working with local emergency managers, making sure that we're all on the same page, pushing out the same information. You're talking about coordination when planning beforehand. I think Aaron's listed a lot of good sites and tools you can use to like start prepping yourself. But then you can go the step beyond too. There are organizations, especially in times of like flooding, where people can prep for volunteerism, where you have a multi-agency resource center. They're called MARCs. But be engaged, right? So, there's some technical terms behind it. VOAD, voluntary organizations active in disaster, but that's like Red Cross, Salvation Army. If you have the time and wherewithal, be engaged on that level. You're talking about the personal engagement to these systems, and that helps people, I think, become a little more proactive in times of disaster, which helps reduce the stress and feel like it's important to coordinate. Just showing up in an event to help doesn't work very well. It just adds more stress and chaos to a situation. Not during air quality events, but for important pieces, we do a lot of work behind the scenes, people in this business about who does what plan and who's that's not critical for the general public. What's critical is making sure that you're just engaged and informed, right? I mean, it's simple stuff. And I think I'm just going to emphasize, make sure you're prepared, go to the websites, make sure you have a plan, and then start doing those steps to like be engaged. And I'm going to say it again. The best way to figure that out is called 211.
That's why you're the disaster dude, Chad. Thank you, of course. Aaron, talk to us about, we're trying to make sure folks are prepared, that they're ready. How do you ensure that communication resources also reach our non-English speaking residents, people with disabilities, even rural communities? And it's a challenge, obviously, with most work that we do is making sure that we're also including, right? Even at 211, we have translation services, we have live, Spanish answer, things like that. But what else are you guys doing, or how else can someone who's listening and they want to make sure that they're reaching non-English speakers, people with disabilities in rural communities?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and unfortunately, we've seen how difficult it can be to get that last mile messaging. We've seen it in with some of the disasters in other states, and so what we've done with our climate and health materials on flooding and heat and air quality is we've translated our fact sheets
Mm-hmm.
into Spanish and Arabic, making sure that we're promoting those materials to the organizations that serve those non-English speaking communities. So really relying on those partners that are already embedded in those communities and trusted sources. I think that's something that we need to do more of as a state public health agency, is to ensure that um, those trusted resources and sources of information at the community level have our materials and have our contacts so they can help spread the word for us. We also have we've been putting a lot of our materials. MDHHS has a clearinghouse of environmental health material and people can order those things for free off the clearinghouse. So we're putting more of those materials up there. Um, and we're also in, social media, um, and some of the traditional ways like press releases, just trying to get the word out in as through as many channels as possible. And then we also have, in our environmental health bureau at MDHHS, we have regional community engagement coordinators. And so we push the information out through our regional coordinators who have established a lot of relationships with local health departments, with other organizations in those communities. So they have that built relationship ahead of time, which makes communication during these events much easier. And I think that's it's a big part of what we're doing, trying to establish these partnerships and relationships ahead of time, so information can flow quickly out to where it needs to get to.
And I was going to piggyback on that just so people are aware that 211 also does provide translation services. We do have that capability. So if somebody's looking for real time information or getting confused, for the English speakers that are listening to this, pass the word along and push it out that, we can help navigate those things as well, from at least from this angle too.
Absolutely. I'm going to let you both tell me. We've talked about getting involved. We talk about, signing up for this and that. But what's the one thing, or man, you have one final word to say, whether it's checking on a neighbor or volunteering, what's the best way an individual walks away? We know 211 in real time. We know to sign up. We know anything else that you would say, here's what you need to do if you really want to get involved.
I mean, I mentioned it before. I mean, depending on obviously, yeah, call 211. Have your go bag, make a plan, have all these pieces. But being engaged, and I mentioned it before, being engaged during a disaster, can help alleviate some of the helplessness, the powerlessness of that. There are volunteer reception centers, volunteer centers in many communities. If they don't exist, there is a footprint of, I mentioned before, volunteer groups. There are a host of them. Some of them are religious based, Southern Baptist, Mennonites, but there are secular. There's Red Cross, Salvation Army. There's a whole host of volunteer groups out there that are looking for people to help and be engaged. So I would say if there's one extra thing to add on to the discussion is that if you want to help and you want to be part of something that really does make an impact in your community, being part of these organizations is phenomenal. And you can start with calling 211 to find access to what those are. I'm sure we'll have some information of how to get a hold of me or the disaster resources on 211 side.
Great.
Turn over to Aaron if you have additional thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. There are so many community-based organizations and groups that are outside of even traditional emergency management organizations that fill a role during these types of events, and that are offering shelter space, or offering, when the power goes out, they have a generator or battery backup. So kind of look around in your community, do a scan, talk to some folks, find out who those organizations are in your community. You can contact your local health department and ask about who they work with in these situations. But yeah, I would absolutely agree with what Chad said. Try to get involved, get connected, and if you're able to during these events, you can be there to help a neighbor, help those that are most impacted.
And I think what you'll find for Michiganders who've not been through a disaster, it is overwhelming. But you do see the good folks step up, the agencies, the organizations, whether it's a school, a local church, a tiny little food pantry, someone making sandwiches. It is overwhelming the amount that our community does support when we have a disaster. So thank you for sharing. Gentlemen, Aaron, Chad, thank you for being here, for being the experts, for joining us on From Hello to Help. We appreciate you sharing this information, as well as just being here to have this conversation and to have people understand a little bit better about what you're doing and what we're doing at 211. To our listeners, if you need disaster relief support, we encourage you to get in touch with 211 for access to the appropriate support for you. That's what we do. Don't forget to follow us on social media and visit our website at mi211.org for more information on the disaster relief resources available to you and many other communities all the things that are available through Michigan 2-in-1. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to having you with us next time on From Hello to Help.